public comments on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will close public comment. Mr. Samario?
Thank you, Mr. Francisco and members of the committee. It is now budget time. We are entering the review phase related to the fiscal year 2011 recommended budget. And as you know, the Finance Committee plays an important role in this process. We do quite a bit of presentations at a department level to the full City Council, but Finance Committee traditionally has been involved in looking at various aspects of the budget, more focus and more detail than what's presented to the City Council to avoid redundancy, but it's still an important part of the process. And today we have for you, we're going to be talking about what we have proposed as the review schedule for the Finance Committee. And you have an attachment in your report, but we also have a sort of an updated version on the screen for everybody to look at. And we have, I believe, 5 or so meetings, 4 or 5 meetings that are set up, and they are going to be longer than normal. They're going to at times start at 12 and sometimes 11 o'clock because there's a lot to cover. But if you look at the screen, you can see what we're proposing, at least starting next Tuesday. And again, this is staff's proposal as to what we think would be an appropriate review for the Finance Committee. If you have any changes, of course, you can make those. But next Tuesday, what we're proposing to cover are obviously a number of things. We'll start at 11 a.m. And we'll start with the general fund balancing strategy. Not spending a lot of time with that, but just kind of an overview reminder, because that's really the framework for much of the discussion of how we address the preliminary $8.9 million budget gap that we identified in the process that we're balancing to. We also want to talk about, of course, our non-departmental revenues, those are taxes and the like, and spend about 20 minutes on those. You've seen a lot of information on that. We want to give an update on those numbers. We have seen some recent upward ticks in bed tax, for example, so we want to show you those. And then we'll get into the first part of 3 parts where we look at the general fund departmental fees, and we're not really intending to go through all the revenues in terms of assumptions made, but really focus on the fees that are proposed for change, whether they're new fees for next year or increased fees or even adjustments downward. So spending about an hour looking at those, and we'll start primarily with community development next Tuesday, and then we'll follow with the key departments that have key changes to their fees that are proposed. And then the last part is a look at our streets program revenues. The Public Works will lead that discussion. And as you know, we've seen some declines, some material declines in some of the key revenues that fund our streets program, particularly like Measure A, which is the transportation sales tax, half-cent that was extended, and also gas tax revenues and other revenues. So take a look at that and see how they're responding to those declines in revenues, not only this year but next year. On that same date, not related to budget, we are going to be covering in the March 31st, the third quarter investment report. And if you can just slide that up a bit, Jill, thank you. And so the following Tuesday, starting at noontime, we'll get into part 2 of departmental proposed fees, and will be the star of that show will probably be Parks and Recreation, but other departments will be included as well. We'll also be looking at the downtown parking. There is some discussion of adjusting the whole rate structure to provide more equity, and so at that meeting they'll be discussing some of their proposals. And then also on that date we'll look at the Gulf Enterprise Fund proposed fees. They are embarking on a comprehensive look at their fee structure and just their overall approach to how they try to how they attract folks to the course. There have been some declines over the last several years, and so they're looking at ways to increase the number of rounds. So they'll spend 20 minutes giving you an overview of at least talking about the process that they're currently underway with to look at those fees. And then on May 11th, Tuesday, May 11th, also starting at noontime, the part 3 of general fund departmental proposed fee changes, and that's if necessary. I think we'll probably need it, but just in case we may not need it, depends on how we go in the first 2 times around. And then we'll look at enterprise fund proposed fee changes. It's about an hour and a quarter, and primarily we're looking at water, wastewater, waterfront, and solid waste fees. Again, not spending too much time on sort of the overall revenues, although there is some connection there, but looking at how much they're proposing the fees for next year, any increases, and why they're proposing them, and what they're going to be funding them, or using to fund them. On May 25th, we will look at have a review of the citywide reserve balances and policies. This was an item that the Finance Committee, I think even Council, had asked us to come back and bring back to the Finance Committee at some point to just review and reevaluate our policies with respect to reserves, not only in the general fund but citywide. And we'll show you what those balances are throughout the city. It's of course in the general fund and other operating funds, which are our enterprise funds. So we'll spend some time on that. And then the rest of the items really aren't related to budget, but it's a full agenda. We're going to be looking at 4 topics: loan for new housing authority project, RDA fiscal year 2010 interim financial statements for the third quarter, our third quarter review on the city side, and then the follow-up discussion of the FY 2010 balancing options. You remember a few weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we were here before Finance Committee with the discussion of balancing this year's budget, and we had identified a couple of other options that we as staff hadn't recommended, but at least posed as options for you to consider. And you asked us to go back and do some work on them. First, you wanted us to go back and talk to the Downtown Parking Committee on the proposed swap of RDA funding for them to pay for the rest of the downtown organization's contract for maintaining State Street sidewalks. And then the idea of paying back franchise fees by the Solid Waste Fund to the general fund over some period of time. And then finally, on May 26th, we have one more meeting that we've scheduled, calendared, and just in case there are other items that you as the committee would like to discuss, or as we go through, we find that we want to have more time, we've set up that date if necessary, and that would start at 10 a.m. and go through noon time. And then once the process is completed, and we'll kind of do it as we go, but once we're all done with this, we'll be taking all the recommendations and comments from the Finance Committee to the full council, and that's scheduled to be June 3rd or thereabouts. And so we'll present to them what all of you have recommended, and they can hear those recommendations and then incorporate those into their own considerations from the full council. And they'll have 3 meetings during which they'll be deliberating the budget, and we've allowed for 3 meetings before adoption in late June. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on this proposed review schedule.
Any questions from the committee members?
Yes, I have a question. Oh, sorry. I do have a question. When we're talking about proposed fee changes, could we have information about the last 2 prior years, what the fees were? And the reason being to see how these have been escalating and if there's any reason for this.
Committee member Self, of course, I think we can bring that information and some historical perspective on what have we done, for example, on water rates the last couple of years and some of the other fees as well. If you're asking for the fee changes over the last couple of years for general fund departments, such as Parks and Recreation, Community Development, keep in mind that there are hundreds of fees that we have on our fee schedule. So not sure how maybe we can narrow that a little bit.
Well, I did receive a booklet. Thank
Right.
you for supplying that. But what I'm saying is if staff is proposing fee for X going through, that what is X's history? Not necessarily the whole gambit.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
I'd make a request to you, Councilmember Self, since we have literally hundreds of fees that we will be voting on, it would be, for the sake of amount of time for staff, it would be better to give us what fees you want the history on.
Any that are proposed to be raised, I think, in order to make a business assessment about the appropriateness of certain fees, that we'd like to know historically what have these been escalating at too fast a rate. I have an alarm system in our home, and the fee went from $20 to $40, 100% fee rate. And I know the city is in trouble, but I don't think we need to do that on the backs of our residents who are trying to survive in a very expensive city.
I understand that, but how much hours of labor are we talking about, or do we have this stuff readily available?
Yeah, we can, going through each fee, and oftentimes in a given year, we might have an across-the-board increase to our fees in one particular area. So it may not be, to every single fee, but I think we can give enough of a broad sort of perspective on the history of those fees that are proposed for change next year to help. And if we need more detail, we might have to set up a special meeting, but we'll do, that's the request of the committee. We'll do what we need to do.
So am I to understand that we're proposing the raise of hundreds of fees?
I don't know the actual count, but in some cases, committee member Self, there are across-the-board increases to fees, and it's typically how we approach these things because, instead of looking at raising fees, dramatically in 1 year after 3 or 4 years of no increases, We try to raise them more periodically and and to a smaller degree. I'm not sure that's the case, but I know that's happened in the past where we might have across-the-board fee changes to like most recreation programs.
There is a
So-
fee booklet of proposed fees, and if you wish to take a look at that and
I have.
and ask for specific ones, that's fine. I do not believe that we should be doing another meeting just so that they can tell you any fees that you might have concerns for. I think that you need to tell us which ones you want greater detail
I have
on.
concerns for any fee that is going to impact any resident of this city. That is my concern.
Well, I am not going to schedule a meeting just to deal with that unless you are willing to do the work and ask for specific background on fees and have them present that to you instead of it having to be always in a presentation form.
It
There are
doesn't need
hundreds
to
of
be
them.
in a presentation form. It can be given to me beforehand, and I'm willing to do the homework to study these fees. But I think as a representative of the residents, I have every right to know the history of what our fee structures have been. And I think that the city needs to be held responsible to a community that is struggling with high unemployment, taxes coming from everywhere, and fee is another form of tax. And I believe that's what I was elected to do, was to represent the residents, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you, but they have presented to you what they can present to you within the scope of work. Is that not satisfactory to you?
I haven't heard that from the department. I have heard from Mr. Samario that they can provide that information,
They can
and I'm
provide-
requesting it.
They said they can provide some and enough of an overview that you should be able to have an idea of what's going on in most areas. Is that sufficient for you?
Is that what you were saying?
Yes, but can I make another suggestion?
Yes.
We have provided committee member Self the master fee resolution that showed all the strike-through changes for the current year, fiscal year 2010, as you requested.
Yes.
We have those from prior years, and we can provide you the same sort of document. I mean, again, it's a thick document, but it has all the fees with all the changes that are proposed, whether they're up, down, because they're in a strike-through format. So we can provide that to you for 2009. And then today, this afternoon, we'll have the same document for next year, the proposed fee changes for 2011. So you'll have a 2-year history plus what's proposed next year. And
Terrific.
So that's another option. We can give that to you, and then at that point, we'll have time. But if we want to schedule a special meeting to go through the
Yeah,
specific
no,
items. Is that helpful,
we
or-
all sit through a lot of meetings, and I'm willing to do my homework, and thank you for providing what I'm asking
Sure,
for.
sure,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
You're welcome.
That was my only concern. Any other questions from committee members?
I have a question. Just out of curiosity,
Francisco.
are there any fees going down?
Gosh, that's a good question.
I can tell you there
I'm not
usually
sure.
is in the Parks and Rec because they usually adjust those based on market.
Yeah.
So I would be surprised if there were not some facilities fees that were going down because they tend to compare this with their competitors, say areas that are rented out for weddings, for example. So there's going to be probably some Parks and Rec fees that will be going down.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I just don't know which ones or if any for next year.
Okay.
But that's an accurate statement.
I have one more question for clarification. As I was going through the book, it sounds as if city administrator, his designee, has been given the authority for dealing with parks and recreation regarding fees. So that is not in the purview of council any longer, correct?
No, I think it's always within the purview of council. It's just throughout the year, just to provide some administrative flexibility, particularly to the Parks and Recreation Director, because as in fact related to, as Mr. Williams indicated, things change throughout the year. We
Right.
had this past year where within a few months the economy turned around dramatically, and it's important to have that kind of flexibility to respond to those changing circumstances. But in some cases, to lower fees to provide better participation, because at certain rates fees levels. When a down economy, people tend to not participate, and if you can adjust and react to those sort of circumstances, it helps with the program participation. So we have provided that authority to the Parks and Rec director only, again, just because of the nature of the fees and programs that they offer.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none? That's good.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.